In 2025, the RIA industry completed over 460 merger and acquisition transactions. That was a new record. Private equity backed 88% of them. The firms doing the most deals, the ones topping every league table, every single one had a financial sponsor behind it. And the conventional wisdom has hardened around a simple premise. If you want to be a serious acquirer in this industry, you need outside capital. You need the speed, the infrastructure, and the credibility that comes with a PE partner. Without it, you cannot compete. I have heard this from investment bankers. I have heard it from consultants. I have heard it from founders who took the PE check and genuinely believe it was the right path for their firm. And I'm not here to argue with that. PE has a very legitimate role in this industry, and many of the firms that have taken that capital are building something real. But I want to challenge one part of that story that does not get examined enough: the assumption that capital is what makes an acquirer serious. Because last year, a firm in Bellevue, Washington completed 2 acquisitions, grew from $10.8 billion to over $14 billion in client assets, hit its 3-year strategic targets ahead of schedule, and did all of it without taking a single dollar from an outside financial partner. They represent themselves in every transaction, no investment bankers. They work with a regional bank relationship they have maintained for more than 15 years. They build real relationships with potential partners before a term sheet ever appears, and they have the discipline to walk away when the fit is not right, because there is no fund timeline, no LP obligation, and no external spreadsheet telling them they need to close. On our last episode of Growth Leaders, we talked about what it looks like to build one firm for 35 years and never need outside capital. True Point Wealth Counsel, growing entirely through organic means, staying PE free through discipline and conviction. That is one version of what building something durable looks like. Today, I want to show you what it looks like to grow from the other direction, going out to find the right people, bringing them in, and giving them the same stake in the outcome you had yourself. 8 acquisitions in 5 years. And the 2 guests sitting alongside CEO Kevin Fitzwilson today are both founders of firms that Coldstream acquired, who now run the firm's growth strategy. That dynamic does not exist anywhere else in this podcast's history. My conversation with Kevin Fitzwilson, CEO, Josh Harris, President of M&A, and David Christian, Chief Growth Officer at Coldstream Wealth Management, is about what happens when you decide that how you grow matters just as much as how much you grow. Let's dive in. Coldstream Wealth Management is based in Bellevue, Washington. They were founded in 1996. They're 100% employee owned, and they manage $14.3 billion in client assets across more than 3,500 households. Of their roughly 250 employees, 170 are shareholders. The number that should stop you is the velocity. In 2021, Coldstream was a $4.4 billion firm. 5 years and 8 acquisitions later, they have more than tripled, and they have done it without taking a single dollar of outside capital. Most firms growing at that pace are either consolidator built or PE backed. Coldstream is neither. So the first question I had for Kevin Fitzwilson was the most obvious one. You don't work with an investment banker?
We represent ourselves.
Yeah.
Okay, that's unusual. And I think I went back and looked at all of the guests that I've had on Growth Leaders, and I think that Coldstream is the only buyer that I've featured on Growth Leaders that doesn't have a private equity partner. And so my mind spins a little bit, right? Because I'm entrenched in this community. We work with dozens of RIA firms. I've worked in this space for over 20 years. And so I see a firm like Coldstream that's saying, we don't work with an investment banker. We don't have a private equity backer. Like, how can you do that? That's such the standard protocol for all buyers in this space. How are you able to accomplish the success that you've had? I mean, maybe let's just start without the PE backing. I know that for a decade you were backed by Boston Private. Kevin, I think that you were really integral in leading the buyback of the firm in 2011 after that 10-year ownership. And now you are a fully independent employee-owned firm. How do you have the opportunity and ability to be acquisitive and opportunistic when you see the right fit without that capital partner?
Well, it goes back to, I mean, we learned a ton. I mean, I was 30 when we did that deal with Boston Private and then eventually Carlyle Group, and we learned a lot. I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, we had a bunch of people at Coldstream back then that were wealth manager, portfolio manager people, and I'm an engineer, I'm kind of a nerd, like numbers, and I found I was the only person who would read the legal documents that were presented in front of us, and so we learned, through looking at well-capitalized public firms of how they structured term sheets, how they did deals, what they walked away from. And I was a sponge early on from an intellectual capital standpoint to put ourselves in the position at that point to make sure we knew what we were doing, but to the best of our ability for the company at then. But we were thinking longer term about, well, we want to be on the other side of this. We need to develop with the intellectual capital and the reps, if you will. And so being a part of that business where they were doing M&A persistently and being part of the senior leadership group of that company, we could see terms, structures, LOIs, and so forth. So we had the opportunity to build up our intellectual capital on that side. So I'd say that's one of the key pieces of our ability to be able to represent ourselves and be able to reasonably competently, understand what we're doing. Also being a student of the industry, talking with the investment bankers and all the financiers and learning about their approaches and taking the time to do that was critical on that aspect. And then buying ourselves out of the Boston Private Carlyle Group thing, we needed money to do that. And
Right.
many of our peers that were in that group, we were the only one that I would say left that didn't have a financial backer. And part of that was we kept them at a minority ownership. Everyone else was majority or whole ownership. So the math was higher and the bar was tougher, if you will, to get out. And then timing, we were lucky going after the management buyout structure after the great financial crisis. So the valuations were about as low as you could ever see. But with that, we still needed to develop a relationship with some third party. And so we were able to get a bank on board with us, a regional bank that would lend to our company with no personal guarantees. So those two backstops of the intellectual capital and then having someone that will lend us money were critical for us being able to go into, okay, we have money, we have some intellectual capital, let's start building a resume of being able to go out and market and find people that are like-minded that could fit with us.
Most acquirers in this industry use investment bankers as intermediaries. There are very good reasons for it. Bankers run the process, manage the negotiation, and protect the principals from doing things at the table that could complicate a deal. Coldstream does it the other way around. And what struck me listening to Kevin is that the choice to represent themselves isn't really about cost. It's about information. When you sit across from a potential partner without a banker in between, you see how they handle pressure. You see what they do when the conversation gets hard. And that, more than any data room, tells you whether the partnership will hold once the paperwork is signed.
We're not using investment bankers as an intermediary to engage with our partners, and they may have counsel, and we encourage that if they think it's helpful. But having that direct engagement is super helpful for us to really understand who we're talking with and what they're about. And I personally believe that you learn a lot more about relationships, your friends, spouses, business partners, and so forth during times of adversity when things are challenging and things are intense, then everything's great and everyone's just chill and relaxed. And so going through a evaluation of possibly selling or merging a business is oftentimes very stressful and a huge deal for a business owner. And we learn a lot about our partners through that dance, if you will. And the fact that we're talking directly and we have the opportunity to work through problems together and deal with tough issues, and lawyers are around, and accountants, and there's lots of zeros and money, and maybe partners are freaking out or whatever. It's a wonderful opportunity to see, hey, can we really work together? Because getting a
Right.
deal done is just a start. And you try to solve for contingencies and what ifs and so forth, but you can't solve for everything because the world's so dynamic at a macro and micro level. And so there's rarely that would happen where we've gotten to an LOI and we find that this isn't the right fit. A couple of years ago, we walked away from a merger after LOI because we learned enough about each other that this wasn't a fit. And both of us were like, I don't think we're going to be able to work together. And it wasn't, fighting or whatever. It's just like a series of things. We're like, gosh, this is just too much. Almost all the time, it goes the other direction, and our confidence builds with every interaction and every tough conversation we work through, and maybe agree to disagree and take a holistic approach, not win every battle and it's, you lose, I win, right? Or vice versa. The people that have that mentality, we can't work together, pre or post transaction. You'd rather figure that out well before, a transaction. So I think that's a differentiator for us too. Of we have the time, we don't have the pressure from the financiers, and we can take our time to really get to know who we're possibly going to partner with.
Just for the record, I'm not an engineer, so I'm not as good at math as Kevin is. But
you're an accountant, though. He's a CPA.
But I always remind people that private equity is not bad, right? It has an incredible, useful purpose in this world. It's just not right for us right now, right? And so it's we're willing to roll up our sleeves and get after it and do the research and take the time to get to know people. And so, and like Kevin said, utilize our own capital. But what that means is when we do use our own capital, you better be darn sure it's going to work. Right. And so we just, sometimes, I think back to 2004 when I started my firm. My second son had been born a month before, and my wife wasn't working. It simply couldn't fail. We didn't have a choice.
Right.
I think the same thing applies today when we use our own capital to do an M&A transaction. It simply cannot fail. That sort of desperation, that pressure, I think is a positive. Right. It means we've got to do the research. We've got to get to know the people, and do things that are right. And it's all us, here and many others on the team making that decision together. We have go, no go meetings throughout the due diligence process, for example, and we want to take input from everybody. We just simply got to get it right. And when we do it, to use David's term, it's magical. It's wonderful. Because we get to work with more great people.
Do you still have that relationship with the regional bank? I mean, you have a debt partner that helps to fund the acquisitions.
Yes.
Yeah, the same relationship manager that we work with 15 plus years ago. He went to another bank and we followed him. And yeah, when Josh and I talk with various capital partners, whether they're debt or equity oriented, and we tell them what we're doing and the terms that we get, and then no personal guarantees. They always encourage us to keep that relationship in good standing. You guys have it's a good thing. And the numbers there's more digits now, more zeros on everything, but it's the same game plan that we've been executing upon.
Financial discipline is only as valuable as what it's in service of. A firm can have the cleanest balance sheet in the industry and still be building toward nothing in particular. So the next question I wanted to ask Coldstream is what all this discipline is actually for. Who are the clients they've decided to serve? How are the teams organized to serve them? And what does the firm look like 10 years from now if everything goes the way Kevin, Josh, and David hope it does? The answers start with a project they ran during the early days of COVID. And before we get there, I want to flag what I think makes that project worth paying special attention to. Most RIAs in this industry don't do ideal client profile work early, even though the work is significantly easier when you're small and homogenous. They put it off, and the cost of that delay compounds. By the time a firm has the will to do it, they usually have a more complicated client base, more advisor opinions to reconcile, and more accumulated assumptions to unwind. Coldstream did this exercise at billions in client assets across 10 teams spread throughout the Pacific Northwest after multiple acquisitions had already brought different firms, different founders, and different client books under one roof. At FICOM, we've supported hundreds of advisory firms through this kind of work, and I will tell you, doing it at that scale with that complexity is a meaningfully different undertaking than most firms will ever attempt. The other thing I keep coming back to is the contrast with TruePoint Wealth Counsel, who we featured in our last episode. TruePoint built one firm deeply over 35 years. They never acquired anyone. They never took outside capital. Their vision of independence is one firm, one client list, one culture, evolving slowly and intentionally. Coldstream is building toward a similar destination, durable, employee-owned, long-term focused, but they're getting there by going out, finding the right people, and bringing them in. Same destination, completely different architecture. And what you're about to hear is how Coldstream maintains a unified vision across teams that all came from somewhere else.
I understand that you've had significant growth over the last 3 to 5 years, and that growth has come both organically and inorganically. And I do want to cover both sides of the growth coin. Let's start with organic, and I'll open this up to whomever wants to take the first pass. What has been the most significant driver of organic growth for Coldstream?
It was about 4 years ago. So I've been with Coldstream 5 years, and the first year was really about trying to understand who the ideal client for Coldstream was. And we did a project for the entire firm right in the middle of COVID. Everyone was getting used to Zoom. And we did a big 2-day project with the entire firm talking about our ideal client. And I think that's actually helped foundationally for us to ensure that all of our advisors were out talking about the same value proposition and talking about Coldstream where we are today and also where we're trying to go in the future. I think that's started a conversation that may not have been as broad as it is today. In other words, it was a conversation that we had, probably like many firms, some individuals who were really good at organic growth, getting out there and doing business development. But now it's a conversation company-wide. Everybody knows the strategy. Everybody knows that it's an initiative that we think a lot about, and so we've just got a lot more participants getting out there, bringing in new clients.
That can be difficult to define an ideal client profile for a firm of your size and scale. I think today you sit at over $14 billion in assets under advisement. It's a large business. You've done M&A, so you've brought in different businesses into one firm. So coming together as an organization at that size can be challenging to figure out what are those commonalities between your clients, and understanding that of course there's differences too. So was that process simple, or were there any learning opportunities? Were there any challenges that you experienced?
I think the key to that exercise, yes, it was difficult. There were a lot of opinions. One of the great things about the people here is they're not afraid to share their opinions, which can be fun. But we deliberately define the ideal client as the bullseye, sort of the perfect client. Obviously, you need clients around that, and so Coldstream's also organized by teams, and that actually also allows us to have each team have a different niche. So David might talk about, for example, they have a lot of dental practices that they work with. That might look different than Seattle, where you might have Microsoft, Amazon clients, these tech folks with a very different financial planning opportunities. What's common amongst all of that with our ideal client is these are families with complexity. Maybe they have children, maybe they have dogs, maybe they have boats, cars, all of these things. Their life is changing rapidly. They're super successful and busy. And so we wanted to create a bullseye that allowed us to serve all of those needs. And again, some folks have more needs than others, but we've built the business, our processes, our operations around serving the complexity of busy families.
And David, I can imagine this is something that you think about every single day in your role. And so, as Josh mentioned, it sounds like there's greater accountability for growth across the organization since you went through this exercise in 2020. You have a team structure, and there's a clear vision of where we're headed and what's expected as we're marching towards our growth goals. But what does that look like for you? Like, how does that show up for you in your day to day as the Chief Growth Officer at Coldstream?
Meg, I think it ties into making sure everyone sees the common vision of what we're trying to do as an organization, taking care of our existing clients, taking care of our team members, rewarding shareholders. Having that common vision really means that everyone has to see that growth is the responsibility of everyone. And through that lens, you have to talk to each wealth manager and identify what is their personal why for wanting to grow. It's really easy to get caught up in servicing existing clients, going that extra mile for that particular client you're seeing that week. But identifying the why helps contribute to their personal motivation, their team motivation. Are they looking for more personal compensation? Is it they want to be a part of a team that's winning? Do they want to see the stock price go up? But centering around what's going to be the difference on helping each wealth manager step out of their normal routine and do those few extra activities every day, getting those more at-bats, growing their skills, is really a core piece of what I think about every day in terms of aligning everybody, but everyone's starting from a different point in time and a different skill set. So it's really piecing it all together so that we're all aimed at down the lane together.
And how do you do that at scale for a firm of your size? I mean, knowing every individual employee or teammate's why that's pretty deep work. I'm curious to know how you do that at scale.
Fortunately, as Josh mentioned, we are organized in teams, and there's 10 teams across the Northwest. So if I can do a really, really good job of finding the champions on each team, whether it's the team lead, it's the people who are native with business development skills and it's in their DNA, and helping them coalesce around where the firm's trying to go overall, then I can lean on them to help downstream with the other wealth managers on their team. And then we do group events. We do cross-team events on a monthly basis. So trying to hit it from a shotgun as well as a targeted rifle approach.
Got it. And when you're tracking organic growth, specifically organic growth on a year-over-year basis, what are you looking for coming in? You're tracking net new asset growth, but are you looking at different sources of that growth and tracking success of each source on a year-over-year basis?
Aggregately, we are tracking and looking at where it's coming from. But what's great about being in a team format is each team and each wealth manager might focus on something slightly different, whether it's having clients become raving fans and you're being very intentional about introductions to their personal network. We have some of our wealth managers that are very strong with centers of influence, and they're out there drumming up conversations on a regular basis. And then we have several wealth managers that are really good at affinity development, and they focus all their time out in the community and passion projects that they have. But in a perfect world, half of our new clients should come from taking care of our existing people, maybe 25 to 30% from centers of influence, and the remainder from affinity development out there playing in traffic.
I have sort of a silly love for Ted Lasso, and he has that sign that says "Believe." And I heard a great quote from an executive coach that said, if you believe what you do matters, how could you not get out there and talk about it?
Right.
And so if our folks understand who they're serving, right, who the ideal client is, and what the value proposition is that we're bringing to them, they really believe that. I think they want to go out there and tell the world.
Oh, absolutely. Kevin, you hear Josh and David both talk a lot about the importance of vision and everyone across the organization being aligned on the vision for the business. So as the CEO of Coldstream, what is the vision for the business, and how do you make sure that that's sort of clearly articulated across a large growing organization?
Well, thanks, Meg. Yeah, I mean, in simple terms, our mission statement is enhancing people's lives. And that's pretty simple and eloquent, but it does extend across all of our business lines, whether it's our wealth management business or our complementary business lines. Tax teams have been busting their butts, getting through another 415 deadline, and they're enhancing people's lives, getting their tax returns done. And we're supporting that, through the wealth management side of the business as well. So that's the shining light in the hill, if you will, where we're going. And there's obviously lots of details and execution around that. And we're talking a lot about organic growth, but could be inorganic growth, or a big part of our efforts, now are integration and building one firm, one brand, one team. So lots of details underneath that, but that's the big picture.
Is there a 5 or 10-year vision, to go from a $14 billion firm to a $100 billion firm? I mean, do you also have, in addition to the mission-oriented vision, do you also have more of like a business vision for where the business is headed?
For sure. Yeah. We just, it's good timing on that question. We just went through an exhaustive process of writing out our 1, 3, 5, and 10-year strategic plan. And it's the first time we've written out a 10-year version of it, which was quite liberating, of thinking about who may or may not even be here then, and where are we taking this company, and what does this mean for the journey for the time we're here, and what do we want to leave behind? And so, there's numbers behind that of assets under administration, revenues, and EBITDA goals. And there's a lot of other details around, integration goals, and where we see the firm of the future is for us, and how we want to position ourselves competitively versus the private equity backed firms that are in many cases growing more rapidly than us. But growing and aggregating doesn't necessarily mean you're out creating optimal value, and for us also optimal experience for all of us as employees and team members and our clients. So we're really focused on paving our own path, and not kind of following others that are in many cases PE backed, and their growth goals are the number one thing. We're
Right.
focused just as much on experience and the journey.
Got it. And I know that culture is so important to Coldstream, but just so that I can contextualize where the business is headed, is there a 10-year AUA goal?
Yeah, we might need to rewind that, Meg, because it doesn't come.
Yeah.
It's so funny. We might be unique in that. Like, AUA is not what drives us.
What drives you?
It's the client and employee experience, right? And if we can get the employee experience right, I think the client experience comes from that. And if that all happens, then AUA, EBITDA, all the money side just happens. It's an outcome, but it's not the first thing that we prioritize at Coldstream. And I think that's reflected in the fact, like Kevin said, is it would be really easy to snap our fingers and have a private equity firm in our business really quickly. There's so many out there. They've improved. What they offer now is a lot different than, say, 10 years ago. And so there's an attraction to that, but we don't want our priority stack to flip. We like focusing on our people and the experience.
How do you measure the success of that at Coldstream? Like, how do you know that you're like dominating that goal year over year?
Yeah. So, Kevin, I don't know if you want to share on this, but we do best places to work surveys, for example, to help measure our employee experience. We track attrition as a KPI. All of these things that just every all company meeting, we do a survey, which might sound a little silly, but it is helpful to get feedback to see in real time, are we on the right track with the messaging that we're putting out there, with making sure that it's relevant to everybody. So you've got to be intentional about it. Everybody hates a survey, get it, but it can provide really good feedback for the team to make sure we're on the right track.
The 10-year vision is, $40 billion of AUA. Is what we put in our strategic plan, which translates into about $320 million of annualized revenues, about $83 million of EBITDA, a 25% plus profit margin, and $1.5 billion enterprise value. And we want to keep part of our business is a bit unique for a firm our size, but we have tax, private fund management, property casualty insurance, other aspects of business lines that are complementary to our core wealth business. And we want to maintain at least 85% of our business by revenues with wealth management. That's for the valuation opportunities are optimized, and we still are a core wealth management firm.
Thank you. That's very helpful and significant growth. When I hear about employee experience, client experience, culture, I wonder about how firms like yours that have grown successfully through inorganic growth and brought lots of different practices together. How do you do that? Like, how do you take me through the step by step of maintaining a focus on culture, experience, but knowing that you have to be integrating firms from the outside? How is that possible?
Well, if I may, maybe I could start with what not to do from a lesson standpoint.
Yes.
Because I think the lessons, at least for us, are instructive in both ways. So 20 plus years ago, when we first got involved with M&A, we were more reactive and I'll call it opportunistic, of like, gosh, some of these firms are doing M&A and we should. And so you meet people at conferences and talk about stuff. And we didn't have a written plan. We didn't have a written intentionality around our, like Josh mentioned, about our ideal client. We didn't have a written summary of what our ideal merger partner is, which we have that written as well and documented. And so having an M&A approach where you don't have clarity in those areas, it could work or it may not. And we had a couple episodes where there were certain positive things and some people that were good fits, but some of the core people were not cultural fits. We weren't aligned. And so we had some fits and starts, if you will, early on. So I'd really encourage anyone that was endeavoring to grow inorganically is to have clarity in those areas and then be intentional about finding those partners and be very patient. You talk to lots of people, dozens and dozens of people before you probably find the right fit. But when we think about the benefits for us of growing inorganically, it was the math and valuation enhancement opportunities. But more critical than that is getting people that you couldn't hire. I mean, I think I look at this screen and all of us have known each other for a very long time and we're all very successful in our own journeys and building our companies. But the opportunity to get all of us together and make 1 + 1 be 3, 4, or 5 is really what's enabled us to, grow a little bit faster and have success, versus some of our peers. So attracting talent that you couldn't get, they're not looking for jobs. None of us have our resumes out. I mean, we've found each other through the journey out there, and we decided to come together to create something that we couldn't all do on our own. So that's been one of this real secret sauces. And I don't see that talked about enough. When people are discussing the pros and cons of M&A, for us is talent acquisition or talent integration is really a secret sauce. And then you got to get stubborn, entrepreneurial, independent people to dance together and find commonality, which is very tricky and challenging. But I grew up playing basketball and soccer and team sports. And so for me, I lean on that from a standpoint of thinking about, we compete, we go through tryouts, we go through lots of practice and stuff. But once we're playing and we're on the field, the gym together, we want to win. And winning together doesn't mean you score all the points, you're on the field all the time. It's having an exceptional experience and meeting your team goals. So we take a lot of those tactics into our journey at Coldstream.
Josh, anything you want to add to that from your seat?
Yeah, I think it's a great summary, Kevin. And I got great advice from one of our board members when I first came in about 5 years ago. And she said, when you do M&A, you don't want to marry yourself. And it was excellent advice because if you really believe in bringing in new and different talent, you've got to sort of step out of your own way. And you're not looking for somebody who agrees with you 100% in an M&A transaction. If you really want it to be additive, if all you want is AUA, great. Okay, just go add that and get along. But if you really want to push the business, get some new thoughts, new blood in the business, you really got to look for folks who challenge you. And I think that's another thing that is not talked about a lot in this industry. Many of us are business owners. We're entrepreneurs. We're stubborn. And frankly, we all have egos. That's just the reality. And so getting a bunch of egos together to say, hey, let's disagree. It's going to be great. It can be really hard.
Kevin, you referenced this a little bit. You all had your own businesses before you came together at Coldstream. And I know, Josh, you were the co-founder of I think it's called Paracle Advisors.
Yes.
And David, you are the co-founder of Cable Hill Partners. Josh, you joined in 2021. David, more recently in 2025. I'm an entrepreneur myself. I understand the real benefits of having the autonomy of vision and full belief in what you're building and ownership of the decisions to get to where you want to go. So, and I think to both of your responses, Kevin and Josh, it sounds very much that you've built this business where fierce entrepreneurs who've built successful businesses can come together to build something greater. Josh and David, I'd just love to hear from your perspective, sort of what was the thought process from I own this successful independent RIA to I see what's possible with Coldstream? That had to have been a leap. So I'd love to just hear both of your stories to understand what your thought process was, why you made the decision, did it go as you expected? And then how do you apply those learnings to the future of the business?
David, I'll go because I'll talk for 30 minutes here. And
Don't have that much time, Josh.
I have some tendencies, Meg. I was reflecting on this because it's 8 years ago that I raised my hand. This was when Paracle was up and running. We were doing great. And I raised my hand. I said, let's figure out what the next step was, and I'll go do the research. I was incredibly naive. 8 years ago, this industry did not look like it does today. There was not as much information. An aggregator, what was that? A branded acquirer, who is that? All of these things that we all know now, we're just evolving. It was just earlier days, and so it took me 3 years to sort of figure out the landscape. I'm a slow learner. I guess if I was in business school, it would have taken me a little extra time to graduate. But at the end of 3 years, we had actually stopped looking. And going back to what I said earlier, we were looking to marry ourselves. We were looking for somebody who was exactly like us. And you think about lessons that you've learned over your life. This was a big one for me. What I was looking for did not exist. And it wouldn't have been as great if we found somebody just like us. We would have just grown the same way, and there wouldn't have been much different. But we wanted to find a partner that wanted to expand their world, if you will, expand their sky. And so when I met Kevin at the end of this 3-year journey, my 3-year journey, what he talked about was, what do you want the journey going forward to be? It wasn't, hey, we can build this and then sell it and flip it. And, there's some end goal out there. It was, how do you want to spend the next 10, 15 years of your life? What do you want to do? And that really resonated with me. And then, from there, having that meeting, we at the time at Paracle had 9 different shareholders. And then it was, okay, now we've got to go explain this to them, help them understand why Coldstream would be a good fit. And in those conversations, it wasn't, hey, Coldstream's perfect for us. It's, hey, here's where Coldstream is. Here's where we're different. Here's what we think we can do with this. Here's the, maybe influence, if you will, we think we can have on this firm to make all of us better. And it was, to Kevin's point, 1 + 1 equals, hopefully 5 by the end of it. And I think everybody started to see that vision.
David, tell me about your journey.
Meg, I think there are some similarities to what Josh is talking about, and Kevin set the frame with, how do you put a bunch of strong-minded people together and want to be on the same team and win together. When we started Cable Hill a dozen years ago, a few of us left a large wirehouse, and we really wanted to make a mark and do things differently and build an ensemble firm where everybody had the chance to win and everyone could have their career tracks. And it was really having how do I give my team members permanence? How do I give employees permanence? The clients have permanence, whether one advisor wants to retire or team members move on, that there was a common experience while leading and growing Cable Hill to a multi-billion-dollar firm, but joining Coldstream. I have 30 people that work with me every day, and I wanted to make sure that they could continue having their own legacy. 100% employee ownership was extremely important to me as well. And the fact that Coldstream has been such a strong advocate for shareholder ownership, employee ownership, not having PE backing, sort of dovetailed into this vision of I've taken this team and this firm to a certain level. What does it look like if we take the next step? As Josh mentioned, we had lots of hybrid roles and hats. And when the budget got to a certain level, when can we afford to hire this full-time position and this full-time position? And I've known Kevin for a dozen years, Josh for almost 7 years. And, you sit around the table and you're sharing war stories with each other. And you're like, you know what? This would be cool if we formed an all-star team. Here's what my team members get. Here's what I get. Here's how we can grow together. So the challenge of it is you got to have people that are willing to check their ego at the door and say, I'm doing this for a bigger cause for more people than just me. And if you do that, it can be actually really magical in how you all blend together.
Two founders, two different paths to the same firm. And in both cases, a decision to walk away from full ownership of something they'd built. The question I keep coming back to is what kind of person actually makes that trade? Because the trade is real. You give up control. You give up the cap table you've built. You give up the ability to make every call yourself. When we come back, the answer Coldstream gave me and why I think it's the most important insight of this conversation. Are you looking to supercharge the growth journey at your business? FICOM is ready to make it happen by serving as your embedded growth partner. Let us put our unmatched industry and growth marketing expertise to work for your business. Our strategy-first, multidisciplinary approach ensures your business goals stay at the forefront, so you're always aligning all your marketing activity around the growth you want to achieve. Visit us at ficompartners.com to find out more. Welcome back. Before the break, two founders described how they came to Coldstream, and in each case, the decision came down to relationships built well before any conversation about a deal. What I want to call your attention to as we move into the second half of this conversation is something that's easy to miss if you're listening for tactics. Most firms in this industry treat culture fit as a soft input to M&A. It's the thing you check after the spreadsheets are done. The vibe of the meeting, whether you want to grab a beer with the founder, whether the team feels like your team. Coldstream treats culture fit as a structural input, and there's a difference. A soft input is something you assess. A structural input is something you engineer. What you're about to hear is how being 100% employee-owned and PE-free isn't just a values position for Coldstream. It's an architecture. It changes who comes to the table. It changes what those founders are willing to optimize for. And it changes which conversations are even possible to have. If you're a leader of an advisory firm thinking about your own next chapter, whether that's bringing someone in, joining someone else, or building something with the people already around you, this is the lens I'd ask you to listen with. The structure you build is going to determine the kind of person who finds you. And the kind of person who finds you is going to determine what your next decade looks like.
I love that. And it sounds to me through both of your stories that there had been long-standing personal relationships before you decided to take on the opportunity of what could be together. Is that consistent across all of the firms that you've integrated, that you've had these long relationships, and that's probably been a driver of how you could assess culture fit? And are these the right type of people to come alongside what we're building toward?
So I would say actually with David, Kevin, David and I, yes, those were long relationships, but with Kevin and I specifically, it actually wasn't. So his house was literally like a mile from our office on Mercer Island, Washington, and we didn't know each other. And so it was the first meeting together was so different. I mean, just the lesson out there for the PE folks. What I was used to is a couple of suits coming in with the rolly bags straight from the airport. And within about 2 hours, they have a term sheet on your desk. You're like, wow, this is 17 years of building a business. This is like raising a child, and you're going to do this in 2 hours. I'm sorry, but no, that's not what we've done. We want to do here. And so the experience with Kevin was just so authentic and honest and transparent. That was the difference maker. And I would say, we, for the most part, the mergers that have worked really well, again, it's about you can accelerate that time frame. It doesn't have to be, a dozen years like David and Kevin, or 7, but you just got to take the time to have the conversation. The first meeting is not about closing. It's about, hey, do I like this person? Are they a good human? Are they trying to do the right thing? And then you start to explore and go from there. I think if you have a mandate to do a certain number of deals each year, pretty hard to take that time. We don't have that pressure. We have the ability to do the deals that we want to do, and we can say no to the deals that just aren't a fit. But I think, I think by the time we get there, the relationships are extremely strong. If we have not cried together, it's probably not strong enough to happen yet. I mean, honestly, it's like these are big emotional,
they're real
hard
real decisions.
Yes.
Well, what's really coming through for me is I think part of the magic of Coldstream is that you have this innate ability to bring the right people together at the right time. And in addition to being obsessed with financial advisors and the impact that advisors have on the lives of the clients that they serve, I'm also a total nerd as it relates to founders. I read autobiographies of famous founders. I listen to podcasts. I follow these founders that I become really obsessed with how they've built these businesses. And there's a lot of different ways to be a successful founder. And some people don't go the route of needing to have that magical capability of bringing the right people together. They take a different approach to how they build their business. But what I'm learning in this conversation about Coldstream, my observation from this conversation is that that's part of your magic, is that you are able to bring the right people together. I've seen other firms try to take the same approach of bringing in, acquiring or merging with other entrepreneurs who have built successful businesses that love being an entrepreneur. And what happens is you end up having these businesses of what I would call intrapreneurs, right? It can happen quite easily where you wake up in a few years and you don't have a shared vision and you don't have a strong culture. And the success of the firm is entirely built on the success of those intrapreneurs that came together, and they might share office space and they might share a brand name, but they actually don't share a vision. And it becomes incredibly difficult to scale organizations like that for all of the reasons that we know. And so that's something that I just find to be really fascinating, because I don't know, maybe you can tell me, can you learn to be this way? Can you train to be this way? Or do you all agree that this is just sort of inherently who you are as people, that you're good at detecting the right types of relationships and the right types of people that can come together? Because I don't see it that often.
Well, everything you said there, I think we all can feel you relative to the tensions and struggles. But I'd love to DC that you hadn't talked for a bit to comment on this. But I think we try, we're intentional, we're not perfect. And you look at the mergers that we've done, there's 8 of them in the last 5-6 years, and almost everyone's still here. And more critically, the most senior people are still here, that we're absolutely critical to the success of the organization, or they've retired, and that was part of the, thesis of merging. I think it has something to do with that, the intentionality, not having the pressures, and then, good luck. We're not so full of ourselves that we think we have most or all the answers, but it is timing, some good luck and good fortune. But DC, what do you think about that?
Hearing this conversation and the questions makes me think there's a tie-in related to, it's sort of a calling card right now that Coldstream doesn't have a PE backer, and it's almost like a niche focus in that. 2 years ago, I could have had 15 term sheets in front of me, but not many of them would have been a firm that had similar values of of servant leadership around how do I grow the people underneath me. And when I'm gone and retired and there's a whole nother level of leadership, we're giving them the same opportunity that we had. Any merger partner could say, just give me the highest bid and not have that same concern around what's this going to be like for my junior team members, the people that put the blood, sweat, equity into building the thing. I want to put them in a place that they're going to be better for when I'm not here. I think that attracts and corrals the servant leader mindset. And if you have that, your ego is not in the way because you're thinking about the others around you. You're thinking about what happens 5 or 10 years from now and what experience are your teams going to have. So I actually think it cuts through the noise and you get to self-select with people that share this common view of how do you want to operate? How do you want to spend your time? Who do you want to spend that time with? So it's actually more organic than you're just doing deals. These are people and relationships and authenticity.
Yeah, I cannot agree more. I mean, it's so right. I go back to that idea of, what's your priority stack? And I mean, this is going to sound probably maybe silly, but we just care about people. That's number one. If the dollars are number one, all right, good to know you. Thank you. But if you care about people and want to create a good experience for them, beyond you, because, look, all of us get older and all of us retire at some point, that's great. It should be celebrated, but let's make sure we leave things better than the way we found it. I think I learned that from my mom and probably ticked her off a bunch of times for not doing that. So I've now learned later on in my life, like, let's really try to leave things better than we found it. What a great legacy. I just can't imagine anything more.
That's the Girl Scout way, Josh. Please.
I was not invited to those meetings, so I did not go.
Well, speaking of great people, one of my good friends works at Coldstream, Matt Sonnen, who's currently your chief operating officer. He started working at the firm several years ago, but had built a business called PFI Advisors, which was really a leading RIA operations consultancy. And I should have found the email actually, because when I read the news that Matt had joined Coldstream, of course I was like, did some really fast research. Who's Coldstream and where are you going? And I sent him an email and I was like, Matt, that was really smart. That was a really smart move from his perspective. But I said in the same email, that was also really smart from Coldstream's perspective. And I think that there was an underlying, even without knowing the details, to me, like I understood an underlying strategic decision that was being made at the firm at the size you were back then when Matt joined, given his experience, not just with PFI, but also prior to that, his experience, it was at First Republic, right?
And Focus.
And Focus. So for a firm your size to bring on a talent like Matt, but also a human like Matt. I mean, like there's no dirt on that guy, Josh, like one of the best humans you'll ever meet. Just kind, compassionate, thoughtful, but also like wildly smart and capable. And so when that happened, I thought, I got to follow this firm because they really have something, they know what they're doing. And it felt to me like a thinking ahead hire. Did it feel the same to you in the moment? And I know that he's since sort of gone on to help the firm figure out integration and how to improve your integration practices and to build skill at the operations level. But if you go back to that hire, talking to Matt, did it feel like we need this now? Or did it feel like, hey, we might not need this right now, but we absolutely need it for where we're headed?
I would say it's where we were headed. We definitely knew we needed some horsepower. But by the way, Meg, you left out, he has probably the best laugh in the industry.
I mean, it's so contagious. I can hear it.
I love it.
Yes.
Every time I hear it, I just love it. But yeah, he was somebody who, as we were looking at where we were going, we had done a bunch of mergers and, all of them were in various stages of integration at that point. And, in order to do more, you got to come in and get all that operating the right way first. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess the answer is it was both, right? We needed some cleanup, but we also needed some vision for the future.
Before we leave that, I'm just talking about cultural mutual due diligence, with Matt. So I hope I'm not oversharing, but Matt, as you know, is highly sought after, and he had multiple choices. So my comment a bit earlier in this call relative to luck, the luck that Matt had decided to look at something different than PFI, and he and his wife had moved that to a certain place, and our timing, that's just, I don't know why that happened, but we were both coming up for air of like, hey, we need to do something different. And a mutual friend put us together. So super thankful of that. And then I won't name the other firm that we were competing against, but it's one of the large, high-profile PE-backed firms that everyone on this call knows of. That group brought him out in a suit and tie dinner and had a bunch of fancy shrimp and glasses and all these kind of fancy
seafood towers and champagne.
Exactly. And so we were like, well, Matt's coming to Seattle. What do we want to do? And no idea who. We knew it was competitive. We knew he was looking at multiple opportunities. So we brought him to a local tavern where Josh and I first met, near our Mercer Island office. That's super low key. It's kind of like the neighborhood Cheers, if you ever watched that show, for those of us at a certain age. That kind of place where the food is marginal, being charitable. Drinks are okay, but we sat around a table and passed around French fries and I don't know, whatever, tater tots or something like that, and had
a lot of fried food that night.
Yeah, and Matt, he told us after the fact that he was like, "Oh, that's when I found my people," because we were like, "This is like, we're not trying to impress you or do some show. Like, this is, we don't drink and eat at bars all the time or whatever, but that's more of our vibe versus some super fancy swanky, we're trying to impress you type dinner." And I remember him saying, like, at that moment, he was like, "I knew I found my people." And he called us up that next day and said, "Hey, I want to join you." And then the other firm he was competing against, their CEO messaged me literally within 2 minutes from Matt telling us what he was doing. He's like, "You guys got a good one. Congrats, man."
Oh, that's awesome. It's okay to have a tavern where everybody knows your name, Kevin.
There's lots of things we're touching on here, but having a view of broad ownership is key. One of the attractions, I think, for people joining us is that, you don't have to, we look at all these wealth firms that have all these funky hoops you have to jump through. Well, in 5 years and you do this and that, and if then you'll have equity or whatever. And our bar is, you're employed at Coldstream, you have the opportunity to own equity. And we have about 170 shareholders of our approximately 250 people. And everyone that's currently employed has the opportunity to own equity. We're also a C Corp. So we're not a flow-through entity. So the thresholds of buying in are only $1,000. And many of our competitors, which when they reach our critical mass, are flow-through entities. And so being an owner means you maybe have 15 state tax returns you have to file in. And being
pain in the ass.
Yeah, the pain in that. And expensive.
I didn't know we could swear on this podcast, Meg.
Oh, you're welcome.
So,
it's going to get real
that kind of structure. That structure, enables us to support something like that.
Yeah.
In many of our transactions, when we get together, the DC and Josh were the same mindset of like they already had, relative to the industry, very attractive cap table and diversification programs they put in place, but then they use the transactions to further expand it even more broadly across their team. And both of them are very generous in the sense of recognizing leaders besides themselves that have contributed to the success of the business and took parts of their enterprise value and spread that around the transaction and took the long view. And to me, that's another example of people that are, I'll call it long-term greedy. I mean, they're both very smart, capable people, but they're recognizing that they can't do it themselves and they're rewarding their teams disproportionately what you see out in the marketplace. And to me, that's another data point of if someone's just hoarding everything for themselves, it's a huge red flag. And it's going to come out post-transaction in a lot of ways that are not going to be constructive for us to be able to work together.
I would also add into this conversation that, we read and talk to a lot of folks who, their debt levels are somewhat outrageous in our opinion. And, I think about, the three of us here, we've all been financial planners for most of our life. And I bet you, if you thought about every one of our clients that we served, somewhere in the high 90 percentile range, all of them will say, I define financial success as having no debt. I think you can apply that lesson to the business. And so we are very careful. Our debt levels, relative to what we hear out in the industry are pretty low. That does require us to have a lot of discipline to say no to transactions. There are a lot of times where, something looks really, really interesting. Either it's a relationship or maybe an outside investment banker has brought it to us and asked us to look, that we just simply have to say, yep, not right now. We'll do it later, but we are not going to put the company in jeopardy by overextending ourselves.
You mentioned, Kevin, that you've got tax, property and casualty, private fund management, additional ancillary businesses that support the wealth management services that you offer to Coldstream clients. Have those additional services come in through acquisition?
Yeah,
Or have
the
you
other
built
one
it
I
from within?
mentioned specifically is investment banking, so sell side M&A along that list. So the first of those complementary business lines we sought out on our own. It was through merger back in 2011. We thought, listening to our clients were, hey, well, you do great for this. Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? And for years we thought we were even in the tax business, 20 plus years ago, and it just didn't work out for a variety of reasons. But property casualty insurance risk management was the first, what we call now, complementary business line we brought in back in 2011. It was through a merger. There was a local Bellevue, Seattle area firm that we'd worked with for a long time, and they joined us, and we kind of grew from there. Some of the businesses we've started that were entrepreneurial shift you mentioned, it's been a combination of that, but it's been a combination of mergers coming in and entrepreneurial activities.
So far, this conversation has been about what Coldstream has built: the financial discipline, the team architecture, the ideal client work, the ownership structure, the filter that brings the right founders to the table. All of that is the firm in its current form, what it is. What I wanted to spend the last stretch of this conversation on is the firm in its forward form, where it's headed, what it's still working on, what it doesn't yet have, and what its leaders are actually worried about. I find this is the part of any conversation with firm leadership where the most honest answers tend to surface. Founders and CEOs can rehearse the origin story, they can describe their differentiation, they can walk you through their org chart. But forward-looking questions, the ones about what's missing, what's threatening, what success would actually look like, those answers tend to come from a different place. They reveal what a leader actually believes, not just what they've accomplished. I asked David what he's most excited to focus on next. I asked Josh what Coldstream isn't doing today that they need to be doing tomorrow. I asked Kevin what threats keep him up at night. And I closed by asking Kevin to define success in his own terms, in a few years' time, knowing the business as intimately as he does. The answers, in order, are about people, about what advisors need to become to serve increasingly complex clients, about what clients are asking for that the firm hasn't built yet, about the dependencies and risks that no amount of internal discipline can fully control, and about what it actually means to leave a firm in better shape than you found it. Here's where Coldstream is headed.
What I like about Coldstream is there's lots of opportunity to add value and to help people get to where they want to be. And one of the key things that's come out over the last few months as I'm digging in and working with more of the wealth managers is growing everyone's skills to a level to where you can put them in front of any prospect and any client, and they have the confidence, they've got the skill set, and they've got the ability to close that business. And, again, we're working with the Kate and Victor Washingtons that have complex needs. And what I find is maybe this is a little bit of an echo of when I think about my own career, 23 years old, straight out of the business. I get my CFP. I've got the intellectual capital related to I know what I'm doing. But there's two other pieces of the triangle, which is that empathetic voice and being an authentic communicator, being a really, really good listener and making sure that you're not just pitching or selling ideas and concepts, but you've got this needs-based lens that you're helping people solve these challenges that are keeping them up at night. And the third piece of the triangle, which I think it takes most wealth managers like at bats and more time in the chair, is how do they crystallize their own version of a leadership voice in terms of making sure you're guiding your clients and prospects where they need to go. And a lot of times you might be talking to corporate executives, business owners. These are alpha personalities that are used to calling the shots. Well, your wealth manager needs to have that right leadership voice of getting them to do the things and get out of their own way so they can be successful financially. So if I summarize that, technical skills, Coldstream is really, really good. Everyone is certified, multiple designations. We have lots of in-house with our wealth strategies group of people learning and developing. We're getting better every day at the EQ side of the business and leading with our questions and curiosity. The third piece in terms of crystallizing each person's leadership voice and how they apply that to their niche clients. I'm excited about it.
Very cool. Josh, what do you think Coldstream, in your seat, president of M&A, what do you think Coldstream is not doing today that you need to be doing in the future?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think I think that answer for me is going to come down to the complementary business lines that we don't yet have. I always think about a question like that in terms of what are my clients asking for? Excuse me, what are our clients asking for is a better way to say that. And, so trust services come to mind. How
Sure.
can we do a better job of offering trust services? And that's not to say, hey, we need to own it, or maybe we need to rent it, or what have you. We don't have that answer. It's something we're exploring. But I think that we have to go beyond just M&A in the wealth management space, but we have to think creatively to build really a true financial services firm, because that's what our clients are asking for. 20 years ago, I would have told you the exact opposite. All they want is financial planning and investments. And if you deviate that from that,
Right.
you're conflicted and terrible human, right? Like that was the industry back then. I think it's just shifted because of client desires. They're
Right.
busy. They want to talk to Kevin, and they want Kevin to figure all of this out, as their advisor. And
Right.
I think that's a wonderful service to be able to add. And I think when you can do it with, empathy and curiosity, like David alluded to, I think that's what's going to give us the ability to, frankly, compete with AI. AI is going to be able to do a lot of all the technical stuff. It can, but it can't do it in the same way a human can do it. It's not going to relate the same way we would one-on-one. And so I think if we tool our advisors to have all of those capabilities and teach them how to empathetically deliver that, I think we will be in a really good seat, a really good position.
Well, I was just curious, in your seat as the CEO, like what is like a threat that keeps you up at night right now?
Well, maybe two things that a couple of things come to mind. The first, on that tail end of that last question that you asked Josh, as far as, what are we not doing now? We need to be going forward. One of the things that comes to mind for me is one of our key rocks, using EOS terms for this year in 2026, is getting our data in a format that we can use AI and use tools. I think this is an industry-wide problem of disparate databases across CRM, portfolio management software, other various databases. We have that problem not just with the wealth business, but we have that across our complementary business lines, where they have their own CRMs that are industry tooled for investment banking or property casualty insurance. They tried using Salesforce to have one for all, and that's don't do that if you're thinking so managing the regulatory aspects of that data, tax has different regulatory. So I think a key thing for us that we're not doing now is getting our data in a format so we can use productivity tools like various AI implementations to enhance the productivity of our advisors and do many of the things that Josh was talking about. And I think about existential risk to our business overall. We are utterly and completely dependent on the custodians. Schwab and Fidelity are where almost all of our client assets are held. And if they do things to maybe start charging clients, custody fees, which you hear rumblings about, if our book of business, if you will, in totality, our $14 billion is spread across Schwab and Fidelity primarily, isn't profitable enough. Many of our peers now are getting charged custody fees. And do you absorb that yourself, pass on to clients? What does that do to your margin, your ability to reinvest in the business? That's one that comes to mind. Cybersecurity is another one that freaks me out from a standpoint. You look at the breaches that have occurred at, I won't name them on this call per se, but just do a little search of the firms that are large scaled firms, RIAs that have had substantial breaches. We haven't, knock on plastic, had that happen, but we're actively doing everything we can to do tabletop exercises, simulate where our weaknesses are, having the lawyers and those consultants come in and spend 3 or 4 hours of, here's a scenario. You've had 2,000 client files breached. The, shiny hunter, whatever the names of those people that we were talking about recently in a meeting, that are some of the bad actors. They're, holding you $10 million ransom. What do you do? Who do you talk to? So that's something else that freaks me out, that again, I think is industry wide a problem,
Totally.
but we're doing all we can to stay in front of it.
Yeah. And final question, Kevin, you have this incredible privilege to be leading this amazing group of people and business forward. What does success look like for you in a few years' time? Like, it doesn't have to be quantitative, but just how would you define success in a few years, knowing the business as intimately as you know the business today?
Well, I think we've talked about it in this call, is it's leaving it a better place for the next generation. There's this infinite mindset. If you follow like Simon Sinek, the
Yes.
optimist guy, of like, having that mindset of like, we're servants, we're stewards for this part of the journey when we're part of this company, and we want to leave it in a better place, whether it's near your 2 year or 10 year or whatever. And so what can we do to preserve and protect what we've built to date and develop our next gen and leave this place in a better form than when we started with it? And so as I think about that, tying to our mission statement of enhancing people's lives, we talk about that regularly with our team. Well, that's our clients, our partners, and yourself. This place should serve you just like you're serving it. So you can put numbers along that or the right side of the spreadsheet or whatever, but if you stay true to those values and that growth mindset and that infinite mindset of we're continuing to seek to improve and leave this in a better place, you can run the spreadsheets out 1, 2, 5, 10, 20 years, but that's really our mindset.
I want to close with the thing that stayed with me the longest from this conversation. When Josh Harris described how Coldstream finds the right acquisition partners, he did not talk about AUM screens or valuation multiples. He talked about relationships. He said that by the time a deal closes, the relationships are extremely tight, and that if the parties have not been through something hard together before signing, it probably is not ready. Kevin added that they have walked away from a deal after an LOI because the due diligence process itself revealed it was not the right fit. Both sides agreed. They moved on with respect. That kind of patience is only available to a firm that is not answering to a fund's return timeline. And I think that is the real story underneath everything Coldstream shared today. The absence of outside capital is not just a values position. It's a structural choice that shapes every decision: who they pursue, how they build relationships, how they finance transactions, and what they are willing to walk away from. The independence is the strategy. David Christian put something beautifully plainly near the end of our conversation. He said that Coldstream's employee-owned, PE-free identity functions as a filter. The founders who come to the table are the ones who are thinking about what happens to their junior team members after they leave. The ones who want the highest bid in the first meeting never make it very far. The structure self-selects for a particular kind of person, the servant leader. And that, more than any operational system, is what has made 8 acquisitions actually work. There is a lesson here for every firm in this audience, not just the ones considering M&A. Growth that compounds over time is almost always growth that is grounded in something more durable than a target number. Coldstream has a 10-year plan with specific financial targets: $40 billion in assets, $320 million in revenue, a defined EBITDA margin. Kevin was transparent about all of it. But when I asked what success looks like, he did not reach for the spreadsheet. He talked about leaving the firm in a better place for the generation behind them. He called it the infinite mindset. In our last episode, you heard how TruePoint built one firm deeply over 35 years, staying fully independent through organic growth alone. Coldstream built from the outside in, finding the right people and bringing them in to shared ownership. Both firms have arrived at the same destination by completely different paths. That tells you something important. There is not one way to build a firm designed to last, but there are principles that both versions share. Long time horizons, real relationships, a definition of winning that includes the people who come after you. Coldstream manages $14.3 billion, serves more than 3,500 families, has 170 employee shareholders, and does not have any shares today owned by a private equity firm. More uncommon than the numbers is the clarity with which they understand why they are building what they are building. That is what a growth leader looks like. If this conversation challenged you to think differently about what it actually takes to grow through acquisition, the single most valuable thing you can do for this show is to leave a review. It's quick, it takes 30 seconds, it helps other growth-minded leaders in our industry find these conversations, and it helps us keep bringing them to you. We read every single review. I would also love to hear what resonated with you. I hope you'll find me on LinkedIn and share your takeaways. For more growth resources for your firm, visit ficompartners.com/insights. And if your firm is ready to take marketing-enabled organic growth seriously, that is what we do every day at Ficom Partners. We would love to talk. Thank you to today's guests, our producers at Pod Pony, production assistant Molly Spina, and my amazing executive assistant, Kristen George. I'm Meg Carpenter, CEO and co-founder of Ficom Partners and your host of Growth Leaders of Wealth Management. See you next time.